and welcome to Christina Marie TV. I'm your host, Christina Marie Flores. We have city character as well as public defender Jeff Adachi with us today. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Hey, it's great to be here.
I love that title, public defender. It sounds like a superhero title. Do you have a cape that I'm unaware of? Or
yeah,
anything?
it's right under my suit here.
Nice, nice. Already he's taking off the jacket. So, public defender, could you explain a little bit about what that is for any of us that might not know exactly what it is that you do?
Well, the term came from California's first woman attorney. She actually sued to become the first woman lawyer in the state because they didn't allow women to become attorneys. And she became a criminal defense attorney because she couldn't get a job anywhere. She became a very well-known attorney. Her name was Clara Foltz. And she came up with the idea of the public defender, with the idea that a poor person should have a right to a lawyer. And even though it says so in the Bill of Rights, it wasn't until probably the 1960s until the United States Supreme Court recognized that people should have a right to a lawyer. Now in San Francisco, we've had a public defender's office since 1921 because of what Clara Foltz did, and passing a law that says people have a right to a lawyer in California. So we've been around for almost 90 years.
So what did people do prior to that? I mean, did they had no defense? They're like, okay, I'm guilty, done?
Prior to 1963, when the Supreme Court decided the Gideon case, which allowed a lawyer for anyone accused of a misdemeanor or felony, if you were charged with a death penalty offense, you got a lawyer. But if you were charged with even a crime that carried a life sentence, if you couldn't afford a lawyer, you had two options. Either you represented yourself or you pled guilty. Wow. And so, it hasn't been until 1963 that the right to counsel was fully realized. And even then, they didn't quite say who was going to pay for it. So it's always been a struggle. The public defender's office in many ways has been treated almost like a stepchild of the criminal justice system. I mean, even our budget in San Francisco, my office, is about half of what the district attorney gets. Our entire department's budget is less than half of what the police and sheriff spend in overtime, just to give you some sense.
Well, that's very interesting. Your interest in did you want to become a public defender all your life? Evidently not. The position wasn't there. But when you were a kid, did you notice anything that you were doing that kind of eventually when I knew back then that this might be the job for me?
Well, I was always the kid who was either getting in trouble or talking my friends out of trouble.
Oh, nice.
You get in a situation and, I'd be the one to say, oh, wait a minute, it didn't happen that way. And so that was good training to be a public defender. But I think it came when I learned about my parents' internment. I'm Japanese American, so both my parents were in the internment camps in World War II. And my parents and grandparents, along with 110,000 other Japanese Americans, were put in internment camps. And I learned about that when I was in third grade, because they didn't teach it in schools. And I remember I learned about it, and I got in a fight with another kid over it, because he was saying, oh, your parents were in jail. And I said, no, they weren't. And then I went home, and I had to explain to my mom why I got in a fight. And she said, and I asked her, I said, is it true? Were you really in, a jail, a prison? She said, yeah, we were in these internment camps. I said, for how long? She said, 4 years. I said, well, what crime did you commit? He said, well, we were Japanese, and my parents were born in Stockton, California, and their parents were born in this country as well. So I'm actually a fourth generation. So my mother had never been to Japan, spoke very little Japanese, and here it was that she was basically incarcerated for her race.
That is incredible to me. I'm just flabbergasted when I heard that. When I was younger, I heard about this. Now, also, they seize property or they take things away. It wasn't just, okay, we're going to put you here now. Okay, now you can come back. They actually seize property and cars and. Yeah,
I had a great uncle who actually owned an island. I don't know how he came to own an island. It was about 100 acres that he owned. And he was up in Canada. In Canada also interned Japanese Canadians. And they took all of his property, seized it.
Wow.
And he never got it back. And I just learned this probably about 5 years ago. And I was like, wow. And so, yeah, I mean, it had a huge impact. And I think it taught me that justice was something that you couldn't take for granted. And it completely changed the way in which I looked at this country, because I grew up you know, believing in, you know, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and, you know, never tell a lie and cutting down the cherry tree. Those are the kind of stories that I grew up with. And so it completely shifted the way that I looked at this country.
Your climb to the position that you are right now, did you face any kind of prejudice that you thought might have impeded your progression?
Well, you know, I have to say that I never had the desire, you know, to run for a public office or be an elected official. For me, it came more. I had been a lawyer in the office, you know, got out of law school. I wanted to do public defense work. I worked on a case of a man who had been wrongfully imprisoned. And I worked on that case not as a lawyer, but just as a volunteer for 7 years. And that experience, he was ultimately acquitted and released from prison. But that experience really got me interested in wanting to be a lawyer, but a lawyer for the people. And so I went into the public defender's office in 1986 and spent about 13 years there doing all kinds of cases from misdemeanors to serious cases, murder cases, and was asked by the public defender, Jeff Brown, then. He had been in office for 22 years and asked me if I wanted to be the next public defender. And I had never thought about it once. And I remember he told me, he said, it's, you know, it's not going to be a big deal. No one really wants to be public defender anyway. You just raise a few $1,000s and run for office. And then I got into this huge contested election with the daughter of the then president of the state senate, John Burton. And it was quite an eye-opening experience, to say the least, because I was a novice coming into politics.
Wow.
But, you know, the tide was sort of turning in San Francisco. And the so-called class of 2000 supervisors were just elected, and my election was that next year. And by some miracle and a lot of community support, I was elected. So I have to pinch myself every day that I have this job.
You have that job. Well, from what I've heard, you're very good at what you do. What is it that makes you very good at what you do? Is there something that's a strong suit that you have that just helps you in your job?
Yeah, I have a great staff.
Okay.
And I think
that's a good answer.
Because you're only as good as the person who answers the phone or the person who's standing up to next to a client in court, or you know, all the different functions that a good legal team provides. It really comes from the office. And I think what I brought to the office was the vision that we need to treat our clients and the families the same way that we would expect to be treated if we were in that situation. And it's hard to imagine. Most people can't imagine being accused of a crime.
But if I was, I sure would like you to be my friend.
Right. And not to judge people, too. You know, it's not our job to look at somebody and say, you know what, I think you're guilty, I think you're innocent, and, you know, defend accordingly. We have to treat everybody with respect. We have to make sure that we investigate every case, that we hold the state to the burden of proof, that we make sure that throughout the process that the person accused of a crime, that their voice is heard. Now, people say, wow, you know, criminal defendants have too many rights. Well, we have an adversarial system. We have the defense, and then we have the prosecutor that represents the state. And so our job is to make sure not only that innocent people are not convicted, but if a person did do something, that they're convicted of the correct crime. I mean, more often than not, we have situations where a person's charged with a bunch of charges and they only did this one thing. I just tried a case last year. It was a 4.5-month jury trial where my client originally was charged with first-degree murder. Well, he wasn't the one that did it. Somebody else did it. And it took about 3 months to sort that out. They still charged him with murder, saying that he was an aider and abetter. And I was eventually able to get that. That means that he somehow helped in this killing, and he didn't. So we got that charge thrown out. Then we went through this trial, and the person who really was responsible for the killing was tried along with him, and he was charged with other crimes, and he was eventually acquitted of all the felonies, and he was convicted of a misdemeanor, which is what he did. And so often it's a matter of sorting out, well, what did this person do? You know, what level of responsibility should they face, and to make sure that the system's working as it should.